Leo Moretti sat at his usual table, in the quietest corner of the city's most expensive restaurant. The table was his office. From this plush leather booth, he managed an empire built on whispers, favors, and the unspoken threat of violence. His face was a mask of calm, a landscape carved by 60 years of hard decisions. His hands, resting on the starched white tablecloth, were perfectly still. They were hands that could sign a death warrant or approve a multi-million-dollar shipment with the same detached precision. Across from him sat two men, their expensive suits looking borrowed, their confidence fraudulent. They were sweating. Leo was not. The air around him was a vacuum. Sound seemed to bend away from his table. Waiters moved with a practiced invisibility, refilling his water glass without a word, their eyes always averted. Everyone in this place knew who Leo Moretti was. They knew his business was not their business. He was listening to the two men stammer through a proposal. A new venture. High risk, higher reward. He had already decided their idea was foolish and their ambition was a liability. He was merely letting them finish out of a cold, professional courtesy. It was in the middle of a particularly desperate plea from the younger of the two men that the rhythm of the room broke. Something was wrong. A figure was approaching the table. Directly. This was not supposed to happen. Leo's two bodyguards, Marco and Luca, were stationed by the entrance, their purpose singular, to ensure no one ever approached this table uninvited. Yet, someone was. He was an old man. Very old. He wore a simple, clean apron over a worn shirt and trousers. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his hands gnarled and stained from a lifetime of work. He clutched a small, lumpy brown envelope in one hand. He did not look like he belonged here. He looked like he had wandered in from another century. Marco started to move, a shadow detaching from the wall, his expression grim. Leo saw the motion from the corner of his eye. The two businessmen at his table had fallen silent, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and fear. The old man stopped a few feet from the table. He was not looking at the businessman. He was looking only at Leo. His eyes, though clouded with age, held a desperate, unwavering light. "Mr. Moretti," he asked, his voice thin but clear, carrying a heavy accent from the old country. Before Marco could reach him, before anyone could speak, Leo raised a single, calm hand. A small gesture. But it stopped Marco in his tracks. It stopped everything. The world held its breath. Leo turned his full attention to the old man. The two businessmen ceased to exist. He tilted his head slightly, an invitation. A question without words. "My name is Antonio," the old man said, taking a hesitant step forward. He held out the lumpy envelope. "I have come to hire you." The silence that followed was profound. It was the kind of silence that follows a crack of lightning. The idea was absurd. Preposterous. People came to Leo for many things. They came for loans they could not get from a bank. They came for problems that the police could not solve. They came in fear and desperation. But they did not come to hire him. Not like this. Not with a crumpled envelope that probably held $100, if that. Leo's gaze flickered from the old man's earnest face down to the envelope, then back again. He saw no fear in the man's eyes. Only a deep, painful sincerity. This was not a fool. This was a man at the end of his rope. This was a man who had broken every rule of Leo's world just to stand here. And Leo, for a reason he could not yet name, felt a stirring of something other than annoyance. It was curiosity. Stay with me until the end, because what happens next is a testament to the fact that sometimes, the most powerful man in the room is not the one with the most money or the most muscle, but the one with the purest heart. If you enjoy stories about honor, courage, and the quiet heroes among us, please take a moment to like this video and hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new tale. And let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Now, let's get started. Leo dismissed the two businessmen with a flick of his wrist. They scrambled to their feet, relief washing over their faces as they practically fled the restaurant. He gestured for the old man, Antonio, to take a seat. The chair was still warm. Antonio sat hesitantly, placing the envelope on the table between them as if it were a sacred offering. "Tell me," Leo said, his voice a low rumble. "Why are you here?" To understand the weight of that moment, you had to understand Leo Moretti. He was not a gangster in the modern sense. He was a relic, the last of the old patriarchs. His father had come from Sicily with nothing but a code of honor and a willingness to work. He had built a small empire in the import-export business, an empire that Leo inherited and expanded into the shadows. Leo's world was governed by rules. Strict, unwritten laws of respect, loyalty, and retribution. He was a violent man, a dangerous man. His enemies had a habit of disappearing. But he was not a cruel man. There were lines he did not cross. He never involved himself in the kind of filth that preyed on the weakest. He dealt with men who understood the risks, men who had chosen the life. And above all, he honored tradition. He honored the old ways. He remembered his own father. A hard man, but a good one. He remembered the smell of his mother's kitchen, a sanctuary of warmth and safety. He remembered a specific dish. A simple peasant meal of pasta and beans. Pasta e fagioli. It was the last thing his father ever ate. Leo had been just a boy, 14 years old. He'd sat at the kitchen table, watching his father savor the humble meal. His father had looked at him and smiled. "Leo," he had said, "never forget where you come from. Never forget the simple things. They are the most important." An hour later, men had come to their door. Rivals. Men without honor, who had broken a truce. They had taken his father from him. Leo never saw him alive again. That memory was the furnace at the core of his being. It had forged him into the man he was today, a man who understood that the world was a brutal place, and the only way to protect the simple things was with complicated, terrible strength. Now, this old man sat before him, a ghost from that same world of simple things. "There is a man," Antonio began, his voice trembling slightly. "His name is Silas Thorne. He is a developer. He is buying the whole block where my restaurant is. My little place. Nonna's Kitchen." Leo knew the neighborhood. It was one of the last pockets of the old city, a place of brick tenements and small, family-owned shops. A place that time, and men like Leo, had largely left alone. "He has bought everyone else out," Antonio continued, his hands twisting in his lap. "He offers money, but if they say no, his men, they cause trouble. A broken window. A fire in a dumpster. Threats. People get scared. They sell. I am the last one," Antonio said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Nonna's Kitchen was my wife's dream. She is gone now, God rest her soul. It is all I have left of her. And of my father." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "Every Sunday, for 40 years, I have cooked a special meal. Pasta e fagioli. It was my father's favorite. The last meal he ate before he passed. It is a promise I made to him. To always remember. The restaurant is not just a business, Mr. Moretti. It is a memory. It is a promise." Leo listened, his expression unreadable. But inside, the furnace roared to life. Pasta e fagioli. A promise to a father. The words echoed across a chasm of 45 years, spoken in a different kitchen by a different old man. "This Thorne," Antonio said, pushing the envelope forward an inch. "His men came last night. They broke my sign. They painted filth on my walls. They told me I have until the end of the week. Or they will burn it down. With me inside." He looked at Leo, his eyes pleading. "The police, they do nothing. They say it is a civil matter. They say they have no proof. They are afraid of him. Everyone is. But I heard stories about you. They say you are a man of honor. They say you protect your people. I am one of your people. My father was born in Palermo, just like yours. He finally looked down at the envelope. This is all I have. My life savings. $2,000. It is not much. But I will work for you for the rest of my life. I will cook for you, clean for you. Anything. Just save my promise. Save my kitchen. Leo stared at the old man. He saw the desperation, the dignity, the deep, abiding love that had driven him here. He saw a man willing to trade the last vestiges of his life not for money, not for safety, but for the sanctity of a memory. A promise made to a father. In that moment, Silas Thorne, a man Leo had never met, had made a grave mistake. He had not just threatened a building. He had desecrated a tomb. He had declared war on the very code that Leo Moretti had built his life upon. Leo felt a cold, quiet rage settle deep in his bones. It was a familiar feeling. The kind of rage that clarified the world into a simple, binary problem. A problem that needed a permanent solution. He thought of his own father's face, smiling over that bowl of soup. He thought of the helplessness he had felt as a boy, the burning shame that he had been too weak to do anything. He was not a boy anymore. And he was not weak. He looked at the $2,000 on the table. An insult to him, a fortune to Antonio. It was the purest, most honest payment he had ever been offered. It was an offering of faith. He made his decision. It was not a business decision. It had nothing to do with profit or territory or power. It was something else entirely. It was personal. Leo slowly reached out, but not for the envelope. He gently pushed it back across the table toward Antonio. The old man's face fell, his eyes filling with the terrible resignation of a man who has played his last card and lost. No, Antonio whispered, his hope crumbling. Please? Leo met his gaze. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of an iron decree. Keep your money, Antonio, he said. You are going to need it to buy ingredients. Antonio looked up, confused. Hope and fear wrestled on his face. This Sunday, Leo continued, his voice as steady as a rock, you will open your restaurant. You will cook your pasta e fagioli. You will honor your father. And you will do the same thing next Sunday. And every Sunday for as long as you wish. He leaned forward slightly, the intensity in his eyes pinning the old man to his chair. This man, Thorne, and his people, they will not be bothering you again. They will not be bothering anyone in that neighborhood again. That is my promise to you. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on Antonio's cheek. He could not speak. He could only nod, his body trembling with a wave of relief so profound it was almost painful. Leo turned his head slightly. Marco! His lieutenant was at his side in an instant, his face a professional blank, betraying none of the surprise he surely felt. He had just witnessed his boss, a man who charged fortunes for his protection, give it away for free. For a bowl of soup he had not even tasted yet. Leo's commands were quiet, clipped, and utterly final. Get Antonio home safely. Have a car wait outside his restaurant, around the clock. Unseen. I want 2 men inside the building opposite, watching. Always. Marco nodded. Yes, boss. I want to know everything about Silas Thorne, Leo continued, his eyes still on Antonio. I want to know where he lives, where he eats, where he sleeps. I want to know the names of his children. I want to know what he fears. He paused. And I want to know about the men he uses for his dirty work. Find them. I want to know their names, their habits. I want to know where they will be tonight. It will be done, Marco said, his voice flat. He understood the tone in his boss's voice. This was not business. This was a hunt. Leo finally stood up, towering over the small table. He placed a gentle hand on Antonio's shoulder. The old man flinched at first, then relaxed into the touch. It was a surprisingly paternal gesture. "Go home, Antonio," Leo said. "Rest. And on Sunday, cook for me. I will be your first customer." Marco escorted the dazed and weeping Antonio out of the restaurant. Leo stood by the table for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked out the large window at the city lights, but he did not see them. He saw a small kitchen, smelled garlic and rosemary, and heard his father's voice telling him to remember the simple things. For 45 years, he had been avenging his father's death. But tonight, for the first time, he felt like he was finally honoring his father's life. The plan was already forming in his mind. It was not complex. It was a tool, like a hammer. Simple, direct, and designed to solve a specific problem. First, you remove the rotten wood. Then, you pull the nail. By nightfall, Marco had the information. Silas Thorne was exactly what Leo had expected: new money, no class. A corporate raider who had built an empire on hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts. He lived in a sterile glass penthouse overlooking the park, insulated from the world he was so busy demolishing. He had a wife, 2 children in a private boarding school, and a portfolio of legitimate businesses that masked a core of pure avarice. His muscle was a crew of local thugs led by a man named Decker. They were brutish, undisciplined, and cheap. The kind of men who enjoyed their work too much, who mistook cruelty for strength. Marco sources confirmed they were the ones who had been terrorizing the shop owners on Antonio's block. They were currently celebrating their latest victory at a dingy warehouse bar in the industrial district. Leo listened to the report without comment. He sat in his office, a dark, wood-paneled room that smelled of leather and old money. He did not need a map. He knew the city's every vein and artery. He knew the warehouse. It was on his territory. Thorne and his hired apes had made another mistake. They were trespassing. "Take 10 men," Leo said to Marco, his voice calm. "No firearms. I don't want a war. I want a lesson. This is about education." He paused, looking at his own hands. "Decker. I want him left for me." The execution was a masterpiece of silent, brutal efficiency. Leo's men were not street fighters, they were soldiers. They moved in 2 cars, dark sedans that ghosted through the city's backstreets. They parked a block away from the warehouse and proceeded on foot, melting into the industrial decay. They entered the bar not through the front door, but through 2 side exits and a rear loading bay, simultaneously. There was no warning. One moment, Decker's crew of 6 men were laughing, drinking, and boasting about terrorizing an old man. The next, the world dissolved into a whirlwind of disciplined violence. It was over in less than 2 minutes. Leo's men moved with a chilling economy of motion. There was no shouting, only the dull, wet thuds of fists meeting flesh and the sharp cracks of bone. Each of Decker's men was isolated and neutralized before they could even understand what was happening. They were dismantled. Leo and Marco entered through the front door as the last of the thugs hit the floor. The terrified bartender was frozen behind the bar, his hands in the air. Marco simply gave him a look, and the man disappeared into a back room. Decker was on his knees, his face a mask of blood and disbelief. 2 of Leo's men held his arms. He was a big man, built of cheap muscle and cheaper beer, but he trembled like a child. Leo walked slowly toward him, his expensive shoes making no sound on the grimy concrete floor. He stopped directly in front of Decker, looking down at him not with anger, but with a kind of profound disappointment. "You broke an old man's sign," Leo said, his voice quiet, conversational. It was more terrifying than a shout. Decker spat a wad of blood onto the floor. "He should have sold." "It's just business." "Business," Leo repeated the word, tasting it. "Is it business to terrorize the elderly? To threaten to burn a man alive in his own home? To paint filth on the walls of a place named after a man's wife?" Leo crouched down, bringing his face level with Decker's. His eyes were like chips of ice. "Let me tell you what you did," Leo whispered. You walked into a church. You spat on the altar. You did this for a man who pays you in pocket change, a man who would not even remember your name if you were gone tomorrow. You did this for nothing. He reached out and gently took Decker's chin in his hand. I am going to give you a message to take back to your employer. But first, you need to understand why you are receiving it. Leo's grip tightened. Decker's eyes widened in pain and fear. This is for Antonio, Leo said softly. And then he broke the man's jaw. The sound was sickeningly loud in the silent room. He stood up, wiping his hand on a clean handkerchief from his pocket. Marco! Get them out of my city. Tell them if I ever see their faces again, I will not be so gentle. Ensure they have nothing but the clothes on their backs. Their money, their cars, distribute it among the shopkeepers on Antonio's block. Anonymously. A fund for repairs. And Decker? Marco asked. Let him deliver his message, Leo said, turning his back. Then he can follow his friends. The second part of the plan was more delicate. Silas Thorne was picked up the next morning. Not by thugs, but by a single, impeccably dressed man who showed him a photograph on a phone. It was a live picture of Thorne's wife, shopping at a farmer's market, with another of Leo's men standing a few feet behind her, admiring some tomatoes. The message was clear. No violence. Just a simple statement of fact, you are not safe. Nothing you value is safe. Thorne, pale and shaken, got into the car without a word. He was not taken to a warehouse or a dark alley. He was taken to Nonna's kitchen. The restaurant was dark and empty. The graffiti was still on the walls. The broken sign was on the floor. Leo was waiting for him, sitting at one of the small, checkered cloth tables, a single cup of espresso in front of him. Mr. Thorne, Leo said, gesturing to the chair opposite. Please. Sit. Thorne Saturday. He was trying to project an aura of control, of outrage. It was a pathetic failure. Fear radiated from him like heat. I think you know who I am, Leo began. And I know who you are. You are a man who believes in numbers. In contracts. In the power of money to bend the world to your will. You can't do this, Thorne blustered, his voice thin. My lawyers will. Leo raised a hand, and Thorne fell silent. Your lawyers operate in a world of paper. I operate in a world of people. A world of consequences. You have stepped out of your world and into mine. Leo stood up and walked slowly around the small restaurant, running a hand over the vandalized walls. Look at this place, he said. To you, it is a square on a map. A property. An obstacle to your profit margin. You do not see what is really here. He stopped and turned to face Thorne. What is here is a memory. A promise between a son and his father. It is a man's entire life. You tried to destroy that. For money. He walked back to the table and sat down, leaning forward. There is nothing more dishonorable than that. You used force against a man who could not fight back. You sent dogs to do what you had not the courage to do yourself. In my world, there is a price for such things. What do you want? Thorne asked, his voice cracking. Money? I can pay. Leo almost smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. You still don't understand. You have nothing that I want. Your money is worthless here. This is not a negotiation. This is a judgment. He laid out the terms, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Thorne would sign over the deed to Nonna's kitchen, free and clear, to Antonio. He would also sign over the deeds to every other property on that block that he had acquired through intimidation. They would be returned to their original owners. You will then transfer a significant, and I mean significant, sum of money to a charitable fund for the neighborhood's revitalization, Leo continued. And then, you will disappear. You will sell your penthouse, you will move your businesses, and you will leave this city. You will never come back. Your name will never be spoken here again." Thorn stared at him, aghast. That's everything. You're ruining me." "No," Leo corrected him. "I am saving you. Because the alternative is that you do not leave. The alternative is that your wife becomes a widow and your children become orphans. The alternative is permanent." The finality in his voice was absolute. Thorn looked around the small, broken restaurant. He looked at the hard, unyielding face of the man in front of him. And for the first time in his life, Silas Thorn understood that he was facing a problem that money could not solve. He had finally met a man whose currency was not the dollar, but the promise. The documents were already prepared. Marco placed them on the table, along with a pen. Thorn, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold it, signed away his empire. The narrative, when it was whispered on the streets, was simple. Silas Thorn had overextended himself and had to liquidate his assets. A quiet, clinical failure. No one ever knew the truth. No one ever needed to. The threat was permanently closed. That Sunday, the sun shone brightly on the old neighborhood. The graffiti was gone from the walls of Nonna's kitchen. A new, hand-carved sign hung proudly above the door. The air was filled with the rich, comforting aroma of simmering tomatoes, garlic, and beans. Leo Moretti arrived alone, on foot. He wore a simple dark suit, but no tie. He looked less like a crime boss and more like a man on his way to visit family. The restaurant was full. Word had spread. The other shopkeepers, the ones who had gotten their properties back, were all there. It was a celebration. A quiet, grateful resurrection. When Leo entered, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to him. Antonio came out from the kitchen, his apron clean, his eyes shining. He walked to Leo and simply took his hand, bowing his head. No words were needed. The promise had been kept. Leo was shown to a small table in the corner. Antonio himself brought him a steaming bowl of pasta e fagioli. It was simple. Rustic. Perfect. Leo took a spoonful. The taste was memory. It was the taste of his mother's kitchen. The taste of safety. The taste of a time before the world had gone wrong. He closed his eyes for a moment, a wave of emotion so powerful it almost buckled him. He had not felt anything like it in decades. After he finished, Antonio came and sat with him. He tried to offer Leo money again, a thick roll of cash. For the repairs, Mr. Moretti. For everything. Leo shook his head, pushing the man's hand away gently. Antonio, you paid me when you walked into that restaurant. You gave me something that has more value than money. What? The old man asked, confused. What did I give you? A reminder, Leo said simply. You reminded me of what is important. Just then, a little girl, no older than 7, came to the table. She had her grandfather's kind eyes. She looked at Leo with the frank, unafraid curiosity of a child. Are you a policeman? She asked. Leo smiled, a genuine, sad smile. No, little one. I am not. My friends at school say there are good guys and bad guys, she said, tilting her head. Are you a bad guy? The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The question, so simple, so innocent, hung in the air. Leo looked at the girl. He looked at her grandfather. He looked around the room at the faces of the people he had, in his own violent way, saved. He thought about his life. The things he had done. The men he had hurt. The darkness that was his constant companion. I am what I need to be, he said softly, his voice thick with a truth he rarely acknowledged. He looked directly into the child's eyes. But today, I got to be the good guy. Before he left, he placed a small, plain white card on the table. It had only a phone number on it. No name. No business. Antonio, he said, his voice low and firm. If anyone ever bothers you again. Or anyone on this street. Ever. You call this number. It was not a suggestion. It was a shield. A promise of lifelong, unwavering protection for this small pocket of the world, this sanctuary of memory and tradition. Leo Moretti had officially extended his world to include Nonna's kitchen. And God help anyone who dared to trespass again. Years passed. The city changed, as cities do. Towers of glass and steel continued to sprout, casting long shadows over the old neighborhoods. But Antonio's block remained untouched. It became a vibrant, thriving community, a testament to the resilience of small things. Leo Moretti grew older. The lines on his face deepened. His hair turned from salt and pepper to pure white. But his eyes remained the same, sharp and watchful. The world of whispers and favors he commanded began to shrink, giving way to a new, more chaotic generation. But his power, his reputation, remained absolute. Every Sunday, without fail, he would go to Nonna's kitchen. It became his church, his ritual. He would sit at the same corner table and have a bowl of pasta e fagioli. He spoke little, but his presence was a comfort, a silent guardian. Antonio eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep, a man who had kept his promise to the very end. His granddaughter, the little girl who had asked Leo the impossible question, took over the restaurant. She had her grandfather's hands and her grandmother's smile. The restaurant, and the tradition, lived on. She never charged Leo for his meal. And he never tried to pay. It was an understanding that ran deeper than money. In Leo Moretti's heavily fortified office, a room that had seen the planning of countless dark deeds, a room that held the secrets of half the city, there was a single personal item on his massive mahogany desk. It was not a trophy or a weapon. It was a small, simple, framed photograph. It showed two men, one old and stooped in an apron, the other tall and imposing in a dark suit, standing in front of a humble restaurant. They were both smiling. It was a picture of Leo and Antonio, taken by the granddaughter one sunny Sunday afternoon. A memento. A reminder. A man's life is often measured by what he builds. The empires, the fortunes, the legacies of power. But sometimes, the true measure of a man is not what he builds, but what he refuses to let be destroyed. True strength is not the power to take, but the conviction to protect. Leo Moretti was, by any conventional measure, a bad man. He lived in a world of darkness and violence. But for one old chef and his sacred promise, he had become a shield. He had used his darkness to protect a small, simple light. And in the end, perhaps that is a legacy of its own. It is a lesson that true courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to stand for something good in a world that is not, proving that even the hardest heart can be moved by the simple, profound power of a memory.